It's time for the podcast. Yeah, the podcast is starting.
What's a podcast?
It's all gonna be alright in the end. It's gonna be alright. And if you've got some worries, my dear little friends, please rest your busy minds, because it's finally time for stories from now and then.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Stories from Now and Then. My name is Captain Blunderface, and we're back in the old library here going through a bunch of books about fashion right now. So we've got, what do we have here? Okay, Pants for Ants. Looks interesting. What about this one? Coats for Goats. That seems warm. What about this one? Hats for Cats. Yeah, I thought so. You might like the pictures in this one, Deprecatus. Also, whatever happened to your Robin Hood hat that I made you? You put it through the washing machine? Actually, that's fine. The washing machine's okay, but wait. Did you put it through the dryer? Uh-oh, let's see. Yeah, it shrunk. Maybe we could find a mouse to give it to now. Well, before we do that, and before we get suited up for today's story, we have a shout out for Simon in Guelph, Ontario. He loves building things with tools, Lego, and anything else he can get his hands on. Simon, this story is for you. Oh, and it looks like we just got a message from our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by Guest Getter. They help restaurants bring in guests and keep them coming back, which is great because I personally forget where I like to eat unless someone reminds me. Guest Getter helps restaurants do that, but on purpose. Check them out, guestgetter.co. And with that, it is now story time. Nicola, please take it from here.
Thank you very much, Captain. Today, we've got a story about dressing up, which can be very fun. And it's also a story about worrying what people will think of you. Have you ever done that? I do it sometimes. Okay, get cozy and let's start. The Emperor's New Clothes. Many, many years ago, there lived an emperor who was so monstrously fond of fine new clothes that he spent all his money on being really smartly dressed. He didn't care about his army, he didn't care for going to the theatre, or even for driving around the park in his carriage, unless it was to show off his new clothes. He had a different coat for every hour of the day. And just as people say about a king that he's holding a meeting with his council, in this country they would always say, "The emperor is in his dressing room." In the great city where he lived, life was very pleasant. Lots of strangers travelled there every day, and one day there arrived 2 swindlers. A swindler is another word for trickster, so they aren't very good people. Now, these swindlers said that they were weavers and said they knew how to make the loveliest cloths and fabrics that could possibly be imagined. Not only were the colours and patterns extraordinarily pretty, but the clothes that were made of the stuff had this marvellous quality to them, that they were invisible to anyone who was either not good enough for his job or else was not smart or clever at all. "Very excellent clothes those must be," thought the emperor. "If I wore them, I could tell which are the men in my kingdom who aren't fit for the jobs they hold. I could tell clever people from the not very smart ones. To be sure, that stuff must be made for me immediately." Accordingly, he gave the 2 swindlers a large sum of money in advance, so that they might begin their work. They set up 2 looms and pretended to be working, but they hadn't a scrap of thread on the looms. In hot haste, they demanded the finest of silk and the best of gold, which they stuffed into their own pockets, and they worked away at the empty looms till very late at night. "I should like to know how they are getting on with the stuff," thought the emperor. But, to tell the truth, he had a little hesitation when he thought that anyone who was not clever or not good at his job wouldn't be able to see the cloth. Of course, he was confident that he didn't need to be afraid for himself, but all the same, he decided to send someone else first to see how things were. Everybody in the whole city had heard what a marvellous power was in this cloth, and everybody was so curious to see how incompetent and how silly everybody else might be. "I'll send my good old minister down to the weavers," thought the emperor. "He can quite well see how the stuff is coming together. He's an intelligent man, and no one is better at his job than he." So the worthy old minister went into the hall where the 2 swindlers were sitting, working at the empty loom. "Heaven help us," thought the old minister, staring with all his eyes. "I can't see a thing." But he didn't say so. Both the swindlers begged him to please step nearer and asked if here was not a pretty pattern and beautiful colours, and they pointed to the empty looms, and the poor old minister kept staring at it, but he couldn't see anything, because there was nothing to be seen. "Gracious goodness," thought he, "am I not very smart? I never thought so, and nobody must get to know it. Can I be bad at my job? No, it won't do for me to say that I can't see the stuff." "Well, have you nothing to say about it?" said the one who was weaving. "Oh, it's charming, most delightful," said the old minister, looking through his spectacles. "The pattern, the colour, yes, indeed, I must tell the emperor I am infinitely pleased with it." "We are glad indeed to hear it," said both the weavers, and proceeded to describe the colours and the unusual pattern. The old minister listened carefully so that he might be able to repeat it when he went back to the emperor, and so he did. The swindlers now demanded more money and more silk and more gold to be used in the weaving. They took it all for themselves. Not a thread was put up, but they went on, as before, weaving at the empty loom. Very soon the emperor sent another honest official over to see how the weaving progressed and whether the stuff would be ready soon. He fared just like the minister. He looked and looked, but as there was nothing there but the empty loom, nothing could be seen. "Well, isn't that a fine piece of stuff?" said both the swindlers, exhibiting and explaining the lovely patterns that weren't there at all. "I am clever," thought the man. "It must be my nice job that I'm not good enough for? That would be a terrible thing, but I mustn't let people notice anything." Whereupon he praised the stuff which he couldn't see and assured them of his pleasure in the pretty colours and the exquisite pattern. "Yes, it is positively stunning," he told the emperor. Everybody in the city was talking of the splendid stuff. At last, the emperor decided to see it while it was still on the loom with a large team of his assistants, among them the 2 worthy officials who had been there before. He went over to the 2 clever swindlers who were now weaving with all their might, only without a scrap of a thread. "Now, is not that magnificent?" said both the worthy officials. Will your majesty just look at the beauty of the pattern and the colours? And they pointed to the bare loom, for they guessed that all the rest of the people there could certainly see the stuff.
What's the meaning of this?
Thought the emperor.
I can't see a thing. This is terrible. Am I not a clever man? Am I not fit to be emperor? That would be the most frightful thing that could befall me. Oh, it's very pretty. It has my utmost approval, said he, nodding complacently and gazing at the empty loom. Of course, he wouldn't say he could see nothing. The whole of the team he had with him looked and looked, but got no more out of that than the rest. However, they said, as the emperor had said, "Oh, it's very pretty." And they advised him to put on this splendid new stuff for the first time for the occasion of a great procession or parade, which was to take place shortly. Magnificent, exquisite, excellent, went from mouth to mouth. The whole company was in the highest state of gratification. The emperor gave each of the swindlers a Knight's Cross medal to pin on his jacket and the title of Gentleman in Weaving. The whole night before the day of the procession, the swindlers stayed up and had dozens of candles lit so they could keep working while it was dark. People could see they were hard-pressed to get the emperor's new clothes finished. They pretended to be taking the stuff off the loom. They snipped with scissors in the air. They sewed with a needle without thread. And finally they said, "Look now, the clothes are finished." The emperor, with the noblest of his personal attendants, came there himself. Each of the swindlers raised an arm in the air as if holding something up and said, "See, here are the trousers, this is the coat, this is the cape, and so on. It is as light as a spider's web. You would feel like you had nothing whatever on. But that is, of course, the beauty of it." "Yes," said all the attendants, but they couldn't see anything, for there was nothing to be seen. "Will your Imperial Majesty be graciously pleased to take off your clothes?" said the swindlers. "We can then put the new ones upon you here, before the large mirror." The emperor took off all his clothes, and the swindlers behaved as if they were handing him each piece of the new suit which was supposed to have been made, and they put their hands around his waist and pretended to tie something securely. It was the long train. The emperor turned and twisted himself in front of the mirror. "Oh, how well it fits! How beautifully it trails!" said everyone. "The pattern, the colours, it is indeed a noble outfit." "They are waiting outside with the canopy which is to be borne over your majesty in the procession," said the chief master of the ceremonies. "Very well, I am ready," said the emperor. "Doesn't it set well?" Once more he turned about in front of the mirror so that it looked like he was really admiring his clothes. The lords-in-waiting who were to carry the train fumbled with their hands in the direction of the floor as if they were picking the train up. They walked on, holding the air. They didn't want anyone to notice that they could see nothing at all. So the emperor walked in the procession under the beautiful canopy, and everybody in the streets and at the windows said, "Ah, how splendid the emperor's new clothes are! What a lovely train he has on his coat! What a beautiful fit it is!" Nobody wanted to be the one who could see nothing. That would mean that he was no good at his job, or that he wasn't very clever. None of the emperor's outfits had ever been such a success. "But he hasn't got anything on," said a little child. "Oh, just listen to the child," said his father. But people began to whisper to each other what the child had said. "That little child there says he hasn't got anything on." "Why, he hasn't got anything on.
The whole crowd was shouting at last, and the Emperor got a sudden chill all over, for he felt they must be right. But all the same, he thought to himself, I must go through with the procession. So he held himself more proudly than before, and the lords-in-waiting walked on behind him, carrying the train. The train that wasn't there at all. Can you believe that those swindlers managed to trick the entire kingdom? The only one who was brave enough to just say what he saw was that little child at the parade. And that was when everybody started to realize the trick that had been played on them. The poor emperor was so focused on having the best clothes and being the most beautifully dressed that he forgot what's really important. I like to think that he learned a really good lesson from this, and he stopped spending all his money on silly things like invisible clothes. But what do you think?
Thanks, Nicola. I'm curious about what you all think as well. Why don't you send us a message to let us know? Would you be like the kid who spoke up and said what everybody was thinking? What would you say? Drop us a message on Instagram at Stories From Now and Then. You could also get a shout out on a future episode. Our show is narrated by Nicola Ward, music by yours truly, and the show is listened to by the coolest kids on the planet. Stay sharp out there, and we'll see you next time on
Stories from now and then.